Hello, my name is Kevin Votzek with Hildreth Media Group, and in this video I'm going to walk through and operate the Blackmagic ATEM Camera Controller. The ATEM Camera Controller is a hardware extension of the ATEM software. This panel can do most of the functions that the software is capable of. But before we dive into the panel itself, I want to mention a couple of things you need to know. As you can see, our setup today is built with mostly Blackmagic design equipment. The camera controller works with the ATEM 2 ME4K, the Television Studio HD, and any other Blackmagic ATEM switcher. Another note, the shader only works with Blackmagic cameras. Today I have two URSA Mini Pro cameras, and the shader is able to communicate with these cameras via a return SDI cable. Just a quick disclaimer, this video is just to show how the panel works and how these buttons affect your image. This is not a tutorial on how to shade cameras. That's a totally different video. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the panel itself. At first glance, this can look intimidating, but it's more straightforward than you might think. The shader can be broken up into 4 identical vertical columns. I like to compare this to an audio mixer. If you understand one column, then you understand the entire panel. Each of these columns is assigned to one camera, and within the column there are 4 subsections. The first is the settings and controls. This is where you can go into the settings of the panel itself and change the network IP, as well as adjust the more physical aspects of the panel like the LED and LCD displays. The second section controls the main camera settings like ISO, shutter speed, white balance, and more. The third section controls color and luminance in the gain, gamma, and lift. And the fourth section controls the aperture and the master black. Now let's move back to the top of the panel and go through it button by button and explain its function. As we go through the panel, there are a couple buttons and functions that Blackmagic has not activated yet. I also have a scene set up of 2 cameras shooting into a miniature car show. This is so that we can see how the shader affects our image. In the first section, if you click the top left button, you can browse the settings menu. I will not go over how to set up your network for your shader, but this is how you access those functions. To the right are your banks. This shader is able to monitor 4 cameras on the board at a time, and 8 cameras total. When you press the bank button on your board, the panel switches to the other 4 cameras you are monitoring. The last button is called the Recall All button. This button allows you to recall presets on all of your cameras at the same time. The knobs at the bottom are used to help dial in an IP address in the network settings. But outside of the settings, the far left knob allows the camera shader to select the camera it's communicating with. As of now, the rest of these buttons and knobs are not activated. Moving on, here is the master gain. The master gain controls the ISO. To change the ISO, use the up and down arrows to the right. Below the master gain is the shutter speed. To change the shutter speed, use the up and down arrows to the right. Currently, the ND and CC functions are not activated. Below, there is an on button. When you press this button, the panel changes from REL, or relative mode, to ABS, absolute mode. We will talk more about this later. To the right is the white balance. In order to change the white balance, hold down the white balance button. Once it's pressed, the white balance will appear where the shutter speed was. While holding it down, use the up and down arrows to change the white balance. To the right, there is a bars button. When pressed, this will send color bars down to your camera. This is a good way to test that the camera and camera shader are communicating. Below are the RGB color adjustment knobs. The top row adjusts the gain. The gain is another way to say the highs or the brights of an image. As I turn these knobs, you can see that it is affecting the bright parts of the image, especially the white in the background. To the right, on the top row, is the gain luminance knob. This knob manipulates the luminance in the gain. The row below is identical, and this row affects the lift. The lift is another way to say the darks or the blacks of the image. As I cycle through these colors, you can see that it mainly affects the black sheet underneath the cars. In order to affect the gamma or the midtones, you need to hold this button below the lift color knobs. When you hold this button, the color knobs that were originally for the lift are now for the gamma. Additionally, if you continue to hold this button, the gain luminance knob will now be the gamma luminance knob, making it possible for you to adjust the brightness of your midtones. There are two reference lights to the right of the color knobs. These are labeled EXT and DEXT. These are not activated yet. Below is your camera ID. This is a display that simply tells you which camera you are shading. If the number is red, that means the camera is live or on the program bus of your switcher. If it is green, it is not live. Below is your iris. This is where your f-stop is displayed. To change your f-stop, raise and lower the joystick. Continuing with f-stops, there are two knobs to the right that allow you to create hard stops with your iris. To do this, place your joystick at the top position and use the second knob labeled coarse to choose your starting point. I am using a lens that can only open up to an f4, so I'm going to use f4 as my starting point. Then place your joystick at the bottom position and then choose your ending f-stop with the knob labeled sensitivity. For this demonstration, I'm going to choose f16. Now, you have condensed the iris throw to your working throw. Below, there is an auto iris feature. Next is the master black. The master black is similar to a luminance knob for the blacks of your image. To change the master black, there is a ring wheel at the bottom of the joystick. To change the master black, simply turn the wheel. Here is the Activate Iris / Master Black button. This button temporarily disables the board's iris in master black to fight against unwanted changes. Here is the preview button. This is where the camera shader can monitor and shade the cameras. If you look behind me on this monitor, as I hit the preview button, the camera displayed is changed along with scopes, which I have set up for my shading rig. Another way to preview the cameras is to simply hit the top of the f-stop joystick. This is a completely separate preview from the switcher and will not affect the director or the TD in their operations. This is a call button. This will send a red box around your camera's LCD monitor as if it was going live to get the camera operator's attention. Lastly, here is the panel activate button. This will disable the entire column of the panel. There are more reference lights at the bottom of the panel labeled network, alarm, and cable. These are not activated yet. Now that we have a good understanding of how the board works, I want to explain a couple more features. These features are relative mode, absolute mode, how to store a scene or look, and how to recall the same scene or look for every camera at the same time. Relative mode and absolute mode. These modes decide the relationship between the hardware and the software. In relative mode, if you make a change on the software and then make a new change in the same category on the hardware, the changes on the software will slowly revert to the changes made on the hardware. This is a slow transition. But in absolute mode, the changes will immediately snap back to what the hardware has instead of a gradual change from the software to the hardware. You can think of absolute mode as a hardware override. Let me demonstrate. I'm going to put the ATEM software full screen and then change the color spectrum in the gain. As you can see visually, I've changed the colors, and numerically I've changed the colors. So let's just take a look at our shot that we have. a green-blue color, haze over it all. So now we're going to go back to the software. Currently, our numerical values are 0.66 for red, 1.15 for green, and 0.53 for blue. Currently on our hardware, all of our knobs are straight up, which would equal a 1 in the same numerical spectrum that we are using. As I turn each knob to the right, and then back to the upright position, which would be 1 according to our hardware, as we take a look at our colors, we are now at 1.09 for red, 1.09 for green, and 1.11 for blue. Now let's take a look at our image. Almost what we had originally. Now this shows that in relative mode, there is a gradual change from the change in the software to the change in hardware. Now let's take a look at what happens in absolute mode. I'm going to do the same exact test. Now I want you guys to really look at the numerical values in the software. Currently we are at 0.57 for red, 1.18 for green, and 0.49 for blue. In absolute mode, these numbers are going to snap back to whatever is on the hardware immediately as I turn the dial on the hardware. So I'm going to start with the red, and I'm just going to move it just a millimeter, and boom, it snaps back to 1, where my direction is on the hardware. And then again for green and blue. This shows that in absolute mode, the hardware will override the software. Now let's learn how to store a scene. In order to do that, the first step is to create a look for our image. For time, I'm just going to add blue into the gain of our image. Once we have that, press store and the number that you want to store it as under Scene Files. I picked number 1. Now if you continue to make changes to your image and then press number 1, which where I stored my look originally, it will snap back to that original look. An easy way to duplicate this look across all of your cameras quickly is to use the software to copy and paste it to all of your other cameras. The Recall All button comes in handy when you need to recall the same look for multiple cameras at the same time. Now I want to go over our workflow. We use a mixture of relative and absolute mode. When you are jumping back and forth between scenes, your hardware will rarely actually represent the scene preset, since you are changing the entire color profile by hitting the preset button. While you are doing this, relative mode is best, so that if you are ever in a situation where you need to make additional changes to your scene, you can do that without reverting your scene back to whatever it was on your hardware. But when you are developing these presets or creating a new look on the fly, absolute mode is best, so that your hardware can accurately represent your colors. For our personal setup, we use a preview monitor, scopes, as well as our computer to see the digital readout of our colors, specifically the numerical digital readout of our colors. This is very important because there is no guide on the hardware itself, and you can see a slight difference in color even if it's 0.03 off. Thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, give it a like. Feel free to connect with us on Instagram at Hildreth Media or leave a comment below.